street cred for Oluwaseun Onibinde. He is the founder of Budget, Nigeria's #1 budget analysis platform, an expert in data analytics, business intelligence and strategy, as well as business development. And most importantly, he's an entrepreneur. Well, today's conversation is going to be on the Federal Account Allocation Committee, or issues coming up from that meeting. It's expected to deliberate on the sharing of revenue among all arms of government today. With dwindling revenue and oil prices, how much is there to share? Now, we know that state governments depend on this money for salaries, and there have been growing protests of many months being owed them. Some state budgets have tried to allocate more for capital spending rather than recurrent expenditure, but the burden is still heavy. So many balls to juggle. CEO Budget Seun Onibinde joins me on the program. Seun, so good to have you in the studio. And
I'm happy to be here.
Yes, it promises to be an interesting conversation. Let's talk about the budgets.
Okay.
We know the Accounts Allocation Committee is expected to actually deliberate on the sharing, formula for the revenue and all the rest to all arms of government. How much really is there to share? Let's backtrack a little bit from what we saw being shared in February, January, even up until December.
Yeah, so in December was 580 billion that was shared because you know that you don't share for that same month. So December funds are shared in January, and you have February funds are shared in February. January funds are shared in February. So for December funds, 580 billion naira. For January funds, it dropped by 80 billion naira to 500 billion naira. And you can understand that most of those funds were also augmented by excess crude accounts and some repayments by NNPC. So going forward now, we'll look at the outlook now. Oil prices have looked stubborn. They've not been going up since for like the last 3 days.
As of this morning, $53
yeah,
actually.
$53. And when we were against that, we were rallying up to $59 the last few weeks. So it's going to show the outlook is looking bleak anymore again. And because we solely depend on oil revenue for like close to 70% of what is shared in fact, there's a really big challenge in that space. So looking at this month again, and with the excess crude account now around $2 billion, you also understand that you can't keep dipping your hands into that.
Well, there's actually talk that as little as 200 billion naira will be doled out to the 3 tiers of government.
There's a possibility because if you can augment from the excess crude account, which like almost $1 billion naira has been taken almost every month the last 3 months from the excess crude account to make up the total money being shared. If you can take from that, because there are also oil marketers who are waiting to be paid, and I suspect that might be the space where they might take the money from. So if you can take from that, you might get $200 to $250 billion. Now that's a dear situation because there was a time we were sharing, even without the excess crude account, we were sharing close to $756 billion naira per month, and now you have 250 billion naira. As of December, 22 states were unable to pay salaries as a schedule, and that's a challenge. And so if we now come to that dear situation, where most states lack vision in terms of diversity, or basically are solely dependent on oil rents from the federal center and other taxes, there's going to be a big challenge in that space.
So that's the biggest question. How will they finance salaries and wages? Because you see, most of the state governments owe so much as far back as from June of last year. They're gradually trying to offset it, but then we have allocations not coming in as much as it should come in, and then it throws up a lot of questions. Should they begin to review minimum wage, or should they be thinking about internally generating enough revenue to offset some of this backlog that they have?
Generating internal revenue, it's a medium-term strategy. It's not a quick fix because you have to build industries, you have to grow manufacturing.
Which is something they ought to have started thinking about doing long before now.
Yeah, long before now, because that's when you can take your payee taxes. For example, in Lagos now, because of the size of the industry in Lagos, you can take a lot of money from payee taxes, and you can be able to run your government from that. We did an analysis and found that 585 billion is the entire IGR for all the 36 states in the country. Lagos State has 263 billion last year, and that's like 45% of the entire IGR collected by state governments in the country. So most states really don't have much money when it comes to IGR. Now that's like a short fix. So I look at it and I find that because of the elections, there's still a lot of padding going on. Everybody's trying to have a good outlook with the civil servants. Even as at now, most people are still borrowing heavily because you find that most state governments are not taking bonds. Like not all state governments have bonds. They all want to take bonds, but it's not being approved because the SEC and also market regulators are looking at the outlook for the states.
But then they have to have a stronger backdrop for them to be able to even take out any bonds of any kind.
Yeah, for example, Osun State took a bond, Moyilola, the former governor, took a bond of 18 billion naira. When the new governor got there, he took another Sukuk bond, an Islamic bond of 11 billion naira. And just last month, when the FAAN allocation was shared, 945 million naira was a debit charge from the state allocation. So imagine you had 945 million naira extra. And because you understand it's going to be a first line charge even from the CBN, even before your money is being added to you. And they still have commercial banks. Most of the states still have debts or obligations to commercial banks within that it's not even available to the public. So at the end of the day, when you hear Osun State says 1.1 billion naira is the final revenue that they finally get from FAAN, it's because most of the states are groaning under debt that are obviously not transparent, not obvious to people, and they're also running high recurrent bills in terms of salaries and overhead. So there's a big challenge going forward. I think most of the states will also be in a hurry to borrow now. There'll be more pressure to borrow. Almost every state now has an application with the SEC to raise bonds, and which most of them are exercising patience and caution in terms of approving that. Gombe recently borrowed 5 billion naira at 16% rate, which is really, really a high interest for state government. So the challenge is going to be that the pressure for debt will keep mounting. Maybe it also helps us have more questions about the efficiency of the oil revenues again, maybe around NNPC, because maybe more state government will also raise voices that how do we ensure that the revenue distribution from NNPC or even from maybe subsidy even has to go, because those are kind of the key questions. But they look like it's not expedient for us to ask now. I mean, because of the elections, everybody's trying to look good. But after the elections, everybody will come down to the facts and we will now take some hard decisions.
But apart from the government bonds, remember at some times there were actually some states that took out foreign loans.
Okay.
So how was it that they managed these loans that it seems as if right now they have to still go cap in hand waiting for allocations to come in? Because they took the loans, they have to pay back those loans, they have the government bonds still hanging over their heads, salaries and wages that they have to take care of, they have infrastructure that they also need to address in their various states. Where did they go?
Problems when you have state governments taking debt is they don't take debts for self-liquidating assets, meaning assets that can pay back itself. So you take a loan, maybe possibly to build a shopping complex, and you know the receipts from that shopping complex gradually pays off that loan. It's a good idea. Or you open up a road where you can toll and you can take a loan for that. But when you take a loan for an asset that can't pay back itself, then there's a big problem in that space. Most of these state governments have gone ahead to take loans, and maybe they are good social projects, a water project. But at the end of the day, you look at it the mathematics of it, because the repayments to those loans are dependent on the volatile product, which is oil, which we are seeing, which we are observing with the slide currently. So the challenge has to be that most state governments have to think through: what do you take loans for? Are they assets that could quietly pay back itself?
What about the foreign loans they even took?
Because foreign loans are also going to come at each cost now, because look at the exchange rate differentiations now. You were paying back at 160 naira, you now have to pay at maybe 190 or 200 naira.
Maybe 198.
198 and 200 naira. There's a big challenge in that space too. And most of those loans were tied to social projects, as I've said, a water scheme, schools, health facilities, which are also all good. But the question you have to also look at it is, could these facilities, in the social prism of it, you say, oh, it's good for us to build good schools for children. And I also also advocate that. But I feel it's better you raise taxes to pay things like that. Because if you take loans to pay that, and they can't pay back itself, and you're depending on FAAN allocations, which are dwindling in the short term, or possibly could even be extended to the mid or the long term, there's a big problem you're going to face in the long run. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about, very recently, the federal government managed to plug some leakages, discovered ghost workers and saved to the tune of almost 280 billion naira thereabouts. Could the state government also begin to look inwards and see how they could also plug their holes? Because it's not uncommon for us to hear a lot of stories about ghost workers. So we have capital expenditure or capital spending being on the low because they're trying to pay more, and so you have recurrent spending in most of the budgets really very high. So could they begin to look at issues like that? And we know that some of them are doing, but how regularly do they do this so that they can plug these holes?
Yeah, federal government has taken some quite good steps. There's still much more to do around even the ghost workers, around even improving the payroll so that they can fish out ghost workers, and even the Treasury single account, which they're pushing out that all revenue generating agencies of government should all pay into a single account, which is very good because you have a lot of agencies outside of government, outside of the budget, generating a whole lot of money, and you can't really figure out how much they make and how much they're remitting. And so state government also have to take radical decisions. Decisions about revenue efficiency. Many of the taxes they don't collect, how are they going to make sure they are more brutal and more efficient in collecting those taxes? How you also ensure that you open up your space to become more climate or investment friendly, build up the investment climate, maybe infrastructure or incentives for people to come and build businesses and also create jobs and employment. So at the end of the day, you take taxes of that. Ogun State looks like someone who has done that very well recently, taking advantage of the Lagos corridor to make sure they maximizes that. How are you also going to position yourself? I was speaking with a friend like Osun State is close to Lagos, not that far. How do you become like an agricultural for Lagos, where you can all bring all the produce, all the food that we all eat in Lagos? You also have to be very, very dynamic in your thinking now as a state government and how you're going to expand your revenue. Are you going to be much more efficient? You also have to look at your own cost, overhead cost. Most of these state government run huge overhead costs. They live like they are like the federal government. The federal government has some space that you don't have, even because the federal government is also going to face its own financial challenges going forward, which has tough questions. But as a state government, you also have to look at your overhead cost. Live to the BRS minimum, take certain level of cuts for your personnel costs. Some state government have close to 40, 60 special assistants.
Personnel cost cuts at this time not start a labor union backlash.
You have to critically think through it. If you have to look at duplication, and if you have to take the knife and say, oh, some people could be paid off as gratuity, and we can maybe drain the system a bit down. But like I said, most of these decisions won't be taken now because of expediency, which is the politics of it. But after the elections, if the oil price and oil prices doesn't look like it's going to ease down,
it's not going to bottom out anytime soon.
So it's a challenge that we will take the knife on, and we'll have to take tough decisions.